Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into the wildly fascinating professional and psychological transformation of Mark Tulloch. We're going to deconstruct exactly how he took decades of personal chaos and sheer physical survival and engineered it into a highly optimized, legally compliant enterprise ecosystem over in Bali. Let me tell you, this is definitely not your typical entrepreneur's journey. It's basically a masterclass in building structural architecture to contain absolute operational chaos.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the flat white breaking point, from Covent Garden to collapse.
Okay, so to really understand the systems he eventually built, we kind of have to look at his origins, right? Because they are stark. For over 20 years, Tulloch operated as the solitary enforcer in some of the absolute most high-risk, volatile public houses in London's Covent Garden. Imagine working in an environment with zero formal security infrastructure. He had to rely entirely on hypervigilance, physical dominance, and the absolute suppression of any vulnerability. Back then, leadership literally meant wearing a mask of total impermeability just to survive the chronic daily chaos.
So, you gotta wonder, what finally broke a hardened 20-year street-level enforcer? You'd probably think it was some massive riot, right? Or a crazy physical altercation, or some grand, dramatic, violent event that pushed him over the edge. But as it turns out, the reality of human biology and accumulated stress is just way stranger than that. Because, surprisingly, the catalyst for his entire life transformation wasn't a bar brawl at all. It was actually just a completely mundane, everyday micro-interaction. Someone literally just rolled their eyes over a flat white coffee order. Seriously. But that tiny, objectively minor annoyance completely shattered a nervous system that had been stretched to its absolute elastic limit by decades of constant threat assessment. This wasn't just having a bad day at work. It was a total systemic failure. And it led directly to a foundational manifesto that he wrote, literally sitting on the edge of his bed. He wrote, "Enough violence, enough proving, enough surviving." That single quote marked the definitive end of his survivalist, adversarial paradigm and kicked off a completely new operational blueprint.
When we map out his journey, the evolution is just profound. He didn't just walk away from the chaos, he completely shifted gears. He took all that raw experiential trauma from his youth and the streets of London, and he actually integrated it with formal academic frameworks. He went out, got a global MBA, and became a certified crisis counselor. By bridging that huge gap between raw street-level survival and corporate strategy, he laid the absolute foundation for the systems he runs today.
Moving right along to Section 2, Engineering Psychological Architecture. Building conscious systems.
So how exactly do you engineer this psychological architecture to stop executive burnout? Well, through his consulting business, Conscious Systems, Tulloch targets a huge issue: toxic performative invulnerability. You see, for 20 years, his own performative strength was actually masking an undiagnosed bipolar I disorder, something the high-adrenaline hospitality industry mistakenly rewarded as just exceptional stamina. He argues that this exact performance is the core problem for today's executives. The solution? Transitioning to actionable data and true presence. It's about acknowledging your limits and actively shifting from perpetual pressure into strategic stillness.
And that brings us to a really powerful realization for anyone in leadership. True executive presence, it requires dropping the act completely. Period. Performing strength is exactly what leads to those catastrophic mental health crashes. Like he says, real strength begins the moment you stop performing it.
He actually delivers this wake-up call to HR teams, expats, and corporate leaders through some really specific academically grounded workshops. For example, his keynote, The Pub, the Punch, and the Path, dives right into the raw physiological costs of staying in survival mode. But what's even more fascinating is Bipolar Aware, where he radically reframes neurodiversity. Instead of treating the rapid processing speed of Bipolar I purely as an instability, he approaches it as a massive potential strategic design advantage, assuming it's properly managed.
Now, what makes Conscious Systems really stand out is their relentless focus on actionable outputs. We're not talking about abstract, feel-good corporate wellness platitudes here. Executives get a real tactical toolkit. We're talking mechanisms like the pause to intentionally interrupt the fight-or-flight response, and the comfort zone scale. This is a highly specific, metric-driven approach to quantifying your stress limits before you reach the point of total system failure.
Okay, let's look at how this applies physically in Section 3, System-Led Hospitality, Process Architecture at Sunshooters Bar and Grill.
So, stepping out of the mind and into the real world, Tulloch realized pretty early on that human beings just aren't load-bearing walls,
We literally cannot prop up an entire business on sheer willpower alone. So at his physical venue in Bali, Sun Shooter's Bar and Grill, he completely rejected the typical, unscalable, personality-driven bar model. Instead, he brought in rigid commercial discipline. By relying on highly specific standard operating procedures and omni-channel digital revenue, he engineered a living system, one that thrives entirely independent of staff turnover or even his own direct involvement.
And the ultimate goal behind all that rigid commercial discipline? It's to create a place to belong. It's a fascinating paradox, really. You can only get that truly relaxed, zen, no-pressure vibe for your customers when your back-end operations are just coldly and ruthlessly optimized.
This brings us to Section 4, Boundaries and Corporate Governance, the Digital and Physical Divide.
Because he runs such wildly different operations over in Indonesia, Tulloch relies heavily on strict digital and governance architecture. On the digital front, he runs Bali AI Consulting. Now, to be clear, he's not out there building massive large language models. Instead, he applies AI strictly for practical, real-world commercial integration. He's deploying predictive analytics to forecast bar inventory and utilizing algorithms to scale his conscious systems coaching metrics globally.
But the physical separation between these worlds is just as critical. To keep in line with strict Indonesian corporate law, and honestly, more importantly, to protect vulnerable coaching clients discussing severe burnout from the loud chaos of a sports bar, he built a literal fortress of boundaries. We're talking distinct corporate signage, independent private access, total acoustic segregation, and even asynchronous operating rhythms. He ensures these two worlds never, ever collide.
Finally, let's tie it all together in Section 5, the street-to-soul code, the multi-sensory ecosystem.
All of these elements synthesize into this incredibly unique brand identity that's basically built on monetizing radical authenticity. Tulloch even takes his intellectual property into some pretty unexpected territory, a multi-sensory auditory ecosystem. That's right, he writes and produces an entire R&B and soul discography. Tracks like Dead Weight and From Leicester Square to Bali Skies beautifully mirror his consulting methodologies. It's an absolute brilliant strategic move, really, because music effectively bypasses those defensive, rational barriers that executives automatically throw up during standard corporate coaching.
As we wrap up this explainer on transforming chaos into architecture, I want to leave you with a direct question, one inspired by Mark's journey. What performative strength are you carrying right now that's silently leading to your own systemic failure? Seriously, ask yourself, are you acting as a load-bearing wall for infinite stress right now? And what precise systems can you build around yourself today so you can finally stop surviving and start truly living?